Thank you, Milton. All right. How's my favorite microeconomics class? All right. What we're going to do today, we're going to cover at least part of each type of competition and a monopoly. Okay. We're not going to cover everything, so there's going to be a follow-up video to this. But what we're going to do is we're going to touch on a few items that I think are important and basically get these cost curves out of the way. They're not as hard as you might think when you first look at them. Okay, where we ended up last time? We were talking about, we were talking about monopoly, and I believe we were talking about how government tries to control monopoly, and sometimes they'll become one themselves. They'll take it over. U.S. Postal Service and Amtrak. Now, when you think monopoly, everybody always immediately thinks, oh, they're making money. But that's not necessarily true. Obviously, when we look at the U.S. Postal Service, we can see it's not necessarily true. What is true, though, is it all depends on where the average total cost curve is. And that's true for all the competitions. Average total cost here, average total cost here. That's our green line. Average total cost here. This is monopolistic competition short run, monopolistic competition long run. We'll explain that in a minute. And then we got our average total cost here for oligopoly. And again, as I think I said in the previous video, it doesn't take an economist. All you have to do is think, hey, if my average total cost is higher than the price I'm getting, I'm losing money. If it's exactly at the price, I'm breaking even economically. And if it's below my price, you're making a profit. It could depend what economic book you look at. Some will call it supernormal profits. Businesses would just call it good business. But it all depends where the average total cost comes into play. So let's briefly take a look again at perfect competition. Perfect competition, as we know, we saw before, the average total cost is up here and your price is here, you're losing money. If your average total cost is down here and your price is up here, you'll be making supernormal profits. But in the long run, because there is, remember, easy entry and exit into the industry in perfect competition. And quite frankly, it is probably the easiest entry and exit. Because we talk about easy entry and exit into monopolistic competition, and that a lot of economists say that's debatable, but generally for the most books you'll see it says there is easy entry and exit in monopolistic competition as well. Anyway, in the long run, for perfect competition, we are going to end up here because there's going to be entry and exit. And what does that do? Well, if you're making supernormal profit and perfect competition, there's going to be other firms that join you, that are going to come in. And when that happens, more producers, the price is going to go down. All right? And the reverse is true. If you're not even making money, you're losing money and you're struggling. Well, if firms are struggling in the short run, they're going to exit. And remember, we talked about break even was where where you hit the average total cost. Shutdown was where your average variable cost hits the marginal cost. At that point, that's your shutdown point. Okay? But anyway, if you're losing money, you're going to exit the industry. And when there's fewer and fewer producers, the price is going to float up. It has to go up. So eventually it's going to go, waver back forward. It'll finally hit here where all the firms are technically breaking even, okay? So, then quickly, perfect competition, we have a standardized product. A carton of strawberries is a carton of strawberries, a bushel of wheat is a bushel of wheat. Not very, a lot of economic books will say this is kind of a boring state, but anyway, it is a standardized product. You're not saying, oh, this is differentiated, this is a better strawberry than this. Typically, they're all the same, all right? Talked about low barriers to entry and exit. And while we're on that stuff, low barriers to exit is also important because it's not developed all that much in some books. But if you're a businessman, you are going to consider what your exit strategy may be if you're forced into that position. And some businesses, you can just gracefully get out. You're not losing your shirt. And other businesses, you've got a lot of custom-made capital equipment, and it is really tough to exit the business. Okay, we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. All right. So again, no market power, meaning they have no ability to affect the price, right? And in general, these firms, as long as their marginal revenue is greater than their marginal cost, they're going to keep making more. They're going to keep making more product. All right. So that takes us a recap of perfect competition. Here's what our monopolist graph looks like. Now, what's happened here again? We talked about a little bit. We have a marginal revenue curve that is below the demand curve. Okay. The demand curve, now the monopolist does have market power, has ability to affect the price. However, the monopolist still has to pay attention, basically, to the market, to his demand curve, okay? So his customer base or demand curve, whatever you want to call it, that can affect the monopolist as well as his revenue, because that's going to show him if he's going to make a dollar or not. In this example, right here, monopolist is making money. And basically, and this is true for all of them, what is our optimization point? Well, we talked about that. Optimization point is where our marginal cost is equal to our marginal revenue. And that's where we start with all of them. We find that point on the graph. So all these graphs, aren't that complicated if you just follow a couple of steps. We say, all right, this is what it looks like. First step, we'll find our optimization point. And for the monopolist, it's where marginal cost equals his marginal revenue, which is here. All right, that's fine. That's going to tell him, that's the best place to be in terms of how much he's going to make. Now, where do we go from there? Well, since it is a monopolist and he can make less, which he is doing, he's making less to charge a higher price, then we take it up. Our second stage is we take it all the way up to our demand curve, our market demand curve. We say, okay, we go from 1 to 2, because that's our demand curve, right? And we just move it over to our price line. Sorry, I didn't put the price in. As we know by this time, I hope, that's price and quantity, all right? So we bring it over, that's the price for the monopolist, all right? But is he making money? This is what this whole lesson is going to be about for the main part. Are we making a buck? Well, we know this is a price, but remember what I said. Now we have to see where is our average total cost. And we see, oh, it's down here. So we bring it down to the average total cost, and we bring it over. That gives us the amount that the monopolist is making, or what some folks would call a supernormal profit, okay? However, again, not many monopolists would think of it in that way. Regulating, and we'll get into this more in the next video, regulating such as a natural monopoly, when a municipality or a city or town really couldn't support more than one electric company, one gas company, water, whatever. That is a natural monopoly. That is probably the most difficult one that governments have to deal with, because it's there. They are the one, and there's not going to be anybody else that really, there's no need for a second gas company or second water company, right? So the governments do try to regulate them. And basically, when they regulate them, all they're doing is they're going to not give them the price they would like, meaning not giving them up here at 2 and having it slide down here a bit. Not going all the way down here, but sliding down a bit from 2. And we'll touch on that a little bit more. But again, monopolist is a price maker, has total market power, right? And there are huge barriers to entry. Unlike perfect competition, there are tremendous barriers to entry in monopoly. Also, there are huge, and these are somewhat tied in together, there are huge barriers in oligopoly. So sometimes huge barriers to entry would be resulting in a monopoly, or sometimes the huge barriers to entry would give us oligopoly, that type of competition. Just think of the big 3. You know, if you were going to go in, you know, would you say there's a rather large barrier to entry if you wanted to start your own car business? Yeah, there are. Is it possible to do? It's possible, but there's been, you know, it's a lot tougher than most folks even imagine. So there's a lot of huge barriers to entry. Anyway, so we've got the same thing. We start with where marginal cost is marginal revenue, bring it up to the demand curve, bring it over, bring it down to our average total cost, and then we see our area of profit. All right. Monopolistic competition is a little different, okay? It's got a little bit of perfect competition, and it's got a little bit of monopoly. So oddly enough, they decided to call it monopolistic competition. All right? Again, it has the marginal revenue curve below the demand curve because you do have some market power as a monopolistic competitor, okay? Typically, they say there's a large number, and we said before, yeah, there are a large number of firms in monopolistic competition, not as large as perfect competition, but thousands of firms, okay? They talk about the fast food industry. There's probably thousands and thousands of fast food companies. They're not all McDonald's. So there's fast food companies would be an example. Perfume manufacturers would be an example. And even chocolate manufacturers would be an example. Although when I was your age, there weren't that many chocolate manufacturers around, so that would have tended to look more like an oligopoly instead of a monopolistic competition. Anyway, we start at the same point, okay? I drew it here showing this would be a short run version of monopolistic competition. We start, again, where our marginal costs and our marginal revenue are equal, there. And what do? We bring it up to the demand, and then we say, okay, that's what the price is going to be. And then we say, well, are we making money or not? It depends where our average total cost is. Well, in this case, our average total cost is down here, so we go from 1 to 2, to 3. Okay, so we go up to find out our price, and then say, okay, well, are we making a buck? Well, find out where our average total cost is. And we bring it and we say, okay, it's down here. Here, this happy little monopolistic competitor is making money, all right? Again, we'll talk about monopolistic competition a little bit more in the next video. They are differentiated products, differentiated by style. Typically, for instance, classic example also of monopolistic competition would be a fast food court and your local shopping mall. You'll have a pizza place, you'll have an Asian food place, you'll have a Taco Bell, a burger place. Underlying, it's all food, right? Are they different? Yes, they're different food, okay? So if you went there and you were in the mood for let's say you're in the mood for a hamburger, and the hamburger is normally sold for, let's say they were selling for $3. Well, if you were really in the mood for a hamburger, and let's say they raised the price 10 or 20 cents, so $3.10 or $3.20, would you still buy the hamburger? Probably. That's the wiggle room of a monopolistic competitor. They do have some market power. However, again, it's within reason. If they raise the price from $3 for the hamburgers to $5, you might say, oh, you know, that pizza place sounds better. I think I'll go there. So they operate within limits. All right? The key to remember with monopolistic competition is we talk about entry and exit. There is easy entry and exit. Now, some economists would argue that might not necessarily be true in some monopolistically competitive industries, but for our intents and purposes, we'll just say there is an ease of entry and exit, okay? So here, the monopolistic competitor, they're making money, right? So again, just like in perfect competition, what would happen? Well, firms are going to enter the industry. Now, what happens with monopolistic competition? It's a little different. What happens when more firms come into the industry, the demand and the margin revenue curves of the monopolistic competitor are going to shift. And basically what that does, when these two shift to the left, you're going to find your average total cost curve eventually rising to right about, in the long run, to right about here, all right? So we say, well, what does that mean? Well, basically what it means in the long run, you start out with your marginal revenue equals your marginal cost, and you bring it up to your price, and guess what? That's your price, but it's also, boom, that's where your average total cost is. So in the long run, because of entry and exit, you are going to end up with a situation that looks like this, where again, you're breaking even economically, which we talked about before. It's not quite as bad as it sounds. If this was reversed and the companies were losing money, well, companies would exit the business. For instance, if you were, let's say you were making some high-grade rubber parts. Let's say you were making some kind of a tire for an industry, and could be a small industrial type tire, and the market the price is just killing you, and you're losing money because your average total cost curve is way above. Well, what's going to happen? You're going to say, well, the heck with it. We can switch our capital equipment over to make vibration control parts. We're going to exit the industry, and that's what will happen. When they exit the industry, you get a shift, but it's just the reverse of this situation. Then it reverses, demand and marginal revenue shift to the right, which will bring our average total cost curve right down to this point here, okay? All right. So, again, it is a differentiated product, differentiated by style, and it could also be differentiated by location. Sometimes you just go to a place that's handy, it's nearby where you live. I talk about a gas station, some books talk about, a dry cleaner, although I don't know, some folks might not go to a dry cleaner just because it's right next door, but some places you just stop at gas, even if that place is a little bit more expensive, if it's right down the street, you end up typically going there. And they have a difference by quality, which we'll talk about more in another video, okay? All right, so we got the combination of perfect competition and monopoly. We call it monopolistic competition. A large number, not a huge number, but certainly not one, like a monopoly. All right? Then we come to my favorite, which is oligopoly. Oligopoly it's interesting. You've got a kinked demand curve. We've got a marginal revenue curve that does follow the elastic portion of the demand curve. Then it somewhat breaks out in a dotted line, and then it continues with the more inelastic, reflecting the more inelastic portion of the demand curve. See, basically we have a kinked demand curve in oligopoly. What does that mean? That means there's a critical point in the oligopoly. There's a critical price point above which, if you try to raise the price above this point, you're going to find yourself with a very elastic demand curve. You're going to lose a lot of business, okay? If you lower your price, you're not going to get that big of a bang for your buck, okay? And as we talk about a handful of producers. So in oligopoly, there are a handful of producers. Great example, especially here in Detroit, would be the big three. Are they a handful of producers, many consumers? Is the product similar? Well, thanks to advertising, if you got somebody who was a big F-150 Ford truck guy or girl, they would say, no, that is the best, that is the best only truck to have. If you get a person who's a Ram tough truck person, there's no comparison. Well, advertising has done a good job, all right? They've differentiated the product. But to a regular person, they would just say, hey, they're both trucks. Well, through advertising, they have been successfully able to differentiate the product. And they have to, okay? All right, so they do have some market power, all right? And what they do, main focus on oligopoly is that their interdependence, all right? They're always looking at what the other person, the other producer is doing. Typically, if your person is going, the other company is going to raise their price. See, we're here in this little area. But if they were going to raise their price further, we were here, but if they're going to raise their price further, what's going to happen? The other companies aren't going to join in right away. They're going to sit back and they're going to say, well, let's see what happens. Let's see if this price increase sticks. Or let's see if it's a fiasco and they just lose market share. Typically, they would have a tough time raising their price. So what's the alternative? Well, they could lower their price, all right? If the price leader lowers the price, the other oligopolists they're going to most probably follow suit. Why? Because they don't want to lose market share. So there is some wiggle room for them. You know, some folks are devoted GM car and truck buyers, or some are, again, Ford 150 trucks. So they do have some brand loyalty, thanks to their advertising, but again, within certain parameters, okay? All right. We'll talk about collusion and cartels in our next video. I'm trying to keep these a little on the shorter side, but basically there's overt, which is collusion right out in the open, like OPEC. They don't care who knows if they're going to fix the price of a barrel of oil. You know, it doesn't really matter. There's covert, meaning we know it's illegal, but we'll try to keep it under wraps and do it covertly. And there's tacit, and that's what we'll talk about. This basically is an understanding where you are going to be. It's not an overt agreement or some agreement you did in secret, but it's just in general, your company has a feel for the market, so do the other 2 or 3, and they know about where to place the pricing of their product, okay? When I was in college a long time ago, they used toothpaste manufacturers as good examples of oligopolists. Okay, but we're going to go into that a lot more in the next video. Does one control more of the market than another? Well, we'll talk about this in some books. They don't have this Herfindahl-Hirschman index, HHI. And what they do with the HHI is to show how much of a market share do the companies have. And what they do, they square their market share and they add them all up. So it could go from anywhere from just slightly, not quite zero, close between 0 and 1, all the way up to 10,000. And the higher the number, the greater one company has a power in the marketplace. So typically, government would look at anything 1,500 and below, that would be okay. There's still good competition. But if they're looking to allow 2 companies to merge, they're going to take a look at that index, okay? Because again, we talk about that index, they want to see, another one is called the concentration ratio. And take the 4 largest, and they say, hey, what are the 4 largest firms? How much of the market are they covering? But again, we'll go into that a little bit more. Barriers to entry, absolutely. Big barriers to entry. And again, that's what makes this somewhat similar to monopoly. Why I brought up this index and governments looking at oligopolists is that when a government allows the oligopolists to collude or work together, when they are working together, then what happens is the result is what is similar to a monopoly. I think in a couple of our textbooks they give the example of a couple of products that were just everyday household products, but if the companies are allowed, the oligopolists are allowed to work together on the pricing, it's going to approach that of what a monopoly looks like. Okay? All right, so again, basic rule of thumb. Are we making any money? It depends where your average total cost is. If it's high, for instance, if we see a high total, average total cost up here, or up here, or up here, guess what? We'll be losing money. Oh, and by the way, what economists would like to see, what we consider a normal operation, normal profit, they would like to see it hit right there, and that would be what they would consider the long run when they're not earning super normal, for oligopolists, when they're not earning super normal profits. But anyway, if the average total cost is higher, in general, you're losing money, okay? If it's tangent, like it is here, just touching, or it is here, just touching, or might be there, then we are breaking even economically. And if the average total cost is lower here or here than our price, then you're making money, all right? So we'll try to keep this as simple as possible. There's a lot more to these types of competition. By the way, monopolistic competition and oligopoly, again, they're called imperfect competition, as opposed to perfect competition and relatively no competition. And we'll talk about more of these in the next video. I'll have more information. They should be coming out a little bit more frequently. I hope everybody's doing okay out there. Things are getting better, and they will continue to get better slowly but surely. So everybody be of good cheer, because things are going to be all right. Okay? All right. Next one will be coming out pretty soon.